I never thought I would become the most talked about person in Meadowbrook Heights, Colorado, but here we are. And it all started with a snowstorm and a woman named Karen Morrison, who thought her position as HOA president gave her the authority to control the laws of physics. It was February when everything went sideways. I am Yates Richardson, 34 years old, a software engineer who works from home, and I have lived in this subdivision for 3 years. Meadowbrook Heights sits just outside Boulder, where the winters can dump serious snow on us without much warning. The subdivision was built about 15 years ago, and like most planned communities, it came with an HOA that seemed reasonable enough when I bought my house. The monthly fees were not terrible. They maintained the common areas, and the rules seemed straightforward. That was before Karen Morrison became president. Karen was exactly what you would picture when someone says HOA president. She was 47, divorced, worked part-time as a real estate agent, and had way too much time on her hands. She had that specific haircut, the one where the back is short and the front is longer, always dyed an unnatural shade of blonde. She wore yoga pants everywhere, even though I never saw her go to yoga, and she drove a white Lexus SUV that she parked diagonally across 2 spaces whenever possible. The trouble started on a Tuesday morning. We had gotten hit with 18 inches of snow overnight, one of those heavy, wet snowfalls that makes your back scream after 20 minutes of shoveling. I got up early and started clearing my driveway. My property sits on a corner lot, which means I have about twice as much sidewalk to clear as most of my neighbors. The city ordinance requires homeowners to clear sidewalks within 24 hours of snowfall, and I always made sure to do it promptly. I had a system. I would shovel the driveway first, creating piles along the edges near the street where the city plows would eventually come through. Then, I would tackle the sidewalks, piling that snow on the strip of grass between the sidewalk and the street. It was the same system every homeowner on the block used. The snow had to go somewhere, and that narrow strip of city-owned land was the logical place. We had been doing it this way for 3 winters without any issues. I was about halfway through the job, sweating despite the 20-degree temperature, when I heard a car door slam. I looked up to see Karen marching across the snow-covered street toward me, her boots crunching with each determined step. She wore a puffy North Face jacket and carried a clipboard, which was never a good sign. "Yates," she called out, her voice sharp enough to cut through the morning stillness. "We need to talk about your snow removal practices." I leaned on my shovel and caught my breath. "Morning, Karen." "What about them?" She stopped at the edge of my property line, which she always did, like she was a vampire who needed permission to enter. "You cannot pile snow on the grass strip near the street. It is a violation of HOA regulations." I blinked at her. "What regulation?" "I have been doing this for 3 years. Everyone does this." She flipped through papers on her clipboard with dramatic flair. "The board held an emergency meeting last night via Zoom. We passed a new ordinance. Section 12, subsection 4, paragraph B now states that no snow shall be piled within 15 feet of the street on any HOA property." "That grass strip is not HOA property," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "That is city property. The HOA does not have jurisdiction over it." Karen's lips pressed into a thin line. "The aesthetic guidelines of Meadowbrook Heights extend to all visible areas of the property, including adjacent public spaces. The snow piles are unsightly and create a negative impression of our community." "Karen, it is snow. It melts." "Where exactly am I supposed to put it?" "That is your problem to solve, not mine. I am simply informing you of the new regulation. You have until end of day to relocate any snow piles that violate the ordinance, or you will receive a citation and a fine of $250. She turned and walked back to her Lexus before I could respond, leaving me standing there with my mouth hanging open like an idiot. I looked at the piles of snow I had already created, then at the snow still covering half my driveway and all of my sidewalks. Where was I supposed to put it? My backyard. That would take hours of wheelbarrowing snow, and for what? Because Karen decided snow near the street looked bad. I pulled out my phone and called my neighbor, Marcus Chen, who lived 2 houses down and served on the HOA board. He answered on the 3rd ring, sounding groggy. "Marcus, did you guys really have an emergency board meeting last night about snow piles?" he groaned. "Yates, man, I am sorry. Karen called it at 9 p.m. Only she and Deborah showed up. I was helping my kid with a science project and could not make it." They claimed they had a quorum because 3 board members were present or accounted for, which is the biggest load of garbage I have ever heard. "So this is actually official." She filed the paperwork this morning. I saw the email. "Look, I am going to challenge it at the next regular meeting, but that is not for 2 weeks. Until then, technically, yeah, it is enforceable." I thanked Marcus and hung up, staring at the snow-covered landscape around me. Other neighbors were out shoveling now, creating the same piles I had made, completely unaware that they were about to get hit with the same nonsense. I pulled out my phone again and started a group text to everyone on our street. Within 30 minutes, I had responses from 8 neighbors, all expressing various degrees of outrage. Karen had apparently made the rounds, delivering her clipboard speech to each of them. Nobody had any idea where to put the snow. Some people suggested just ignoring it, but I knew Karen well enough to know she would absolutely follow through on the fines. That is when inspiration struck me. I was reading through the new ordinance that Karen had emailed to everyone, and I noticed something interesting. The rule stated that snow could not be piled within 15 feet of the street on HOA property or adjacent public spaces visible from the street. But it said nothing about private property beyond that 15-foot boundary. And more importantly, it said nothing about whose private property the snow had to be on. I checked the subdivision plat map, which was public record and available on the county website. I measured the distance from the street to Karen's front lawn. Her house sat back about 40 feet from the street, well beyond the 15-foot restriction. Her front lawn was spacious, at least 2,000 square feet of grass that she paid a landscaping service to keep pristine during the summer months. A slow smile spread across my face. If Karen wanted to make ridiculous rules about where snow could and could not go, then I would follow her rules exactly. The snow could not be near the street, but she never said it could not be on someone's front lawn. And since she was the one who created this problem, it seemed only fair that she should be the one to help solve it. I knew I needed to be smart about this. I could not just trespass onto her property and dump snow. But I also knew that Karen's interpretation of HOA rules was often creative at best and completely made up at worst. I grabbed my laptop and spent the next hour researching. I looked through every HOA document, every covenant, every restriction that applied to our subdivision. And I found exactly what I needed. The HOA had an easement clause. It stated that in cases where compliance with HOA regulations created an undue burden, homeowners could request temporary use of common areas, or, in extreme circumstances, other private property within the subdivision to achieve compliance. The clause had been written years ago to deal with construction projects, allowing contractors to stage equipment on nearby lawns if driveways were too small. but the language was broad enough that it could theoretically apply to snow removal. I drafted a formal request to the HOA board, citing the new snow ordinance and the undue burden it created. I explained that my corner lot had insufficient space to store the required snow within compliance boundaries, and I requested temporary use of available lawn space to achieve compliance. I made sure to note that any damage to the grass would be remediate in the spring, which was standard language from the easement clause. Then I got creative. I submitted 3 possible locations for my temporary snow storage: the community park, which was a common area, the vacant lot at the end of the street, which was owned by the HOA, and, as my third option, 847 Maple Drive, Karen's address. I emailed the request at noon, marking it as urgent and citing the 24-hour deadline Karen had given me to relocate my snow. Then I waited. 2 hours passed. I finished shoveling my sidewalks, but I left all the snow in piles near the street, clearly in violation of Karen's new rule. I wanted to make sure she could see that I had not complied yet. At 2:30, I got a response from Deborah Walsh, the HOA secretary. It was short and clearly written in a hurry. Request approved for temporary snow storage. Use of vacant lot at 1240 Spruce Drive authorized for 60 days or until snowmelt, whichever comes first. I read the email 3 times, then checked the address. The vacant lot was on the opposite end of the subdivision, nearly half a mile away. I would have to wheelbarrow snow through the entire neighborhood to get there. This was not going to work. I called Marcus again. Did you see the response to my easement request? Yeah, man. Deborah is just doing whatever Karen tells her to do, but listen, I did some digging. That approval is not valid. What do you mean? Easement requests require a 72-hour review period and a full board vote. They fast-tracked your request without proper procedure. If you want to challenge it, you can. What happens if I just ignore their approval and use one of my other requested locations? Marcus was quiet for a moment. Technically, since they did not follow procedure, your request is still in the proper review period. You would not be violating anything because there is no valid decision yet. But Yates, if you are thinking about doing what I think you are thinking about doing, just be careful. Karen will lose her mind. That is kind of the point, I said. I spent the rest of the afternoon preparing. I borrowed a large snow scoop on wheels from my other neighbor, Jeff Patterson. I made sure my phone was fully charged because I wanted to document everything. And I printed out copies of all the relevant HOA documents, including the new snow ordinance, the easement clause, and the improperly approved request. At 5 p.m., when the winter sun was already setting and the temperature was dropping fast, I started moving snow. I loaded up the wheeled scoop and pushed it down the sidewalk toward Karen's house. She lived 4 houses down from me on the same street. The journey took about 3 minutes per load. Karen's house was dark. Her Lexus was not in the driveway. I knew she sometimes showed properties in the evening, so I was hoping for a window of time to get at least some of the work done before she noticed. The first load of snow went right in the middle of her front lawn, about 30 feet from the street, well beyond the 15-foot restriction. Perfectly compliant with her new ordinance. I dumped it out, creating a white mound about 3 feet tall, and headed back for more. It took me 23 trips to move all the snow from my driveway and sidewalks. By the time I finished, Karen's front lawn looked like a snow farm. I had created neat rows of snow piles, each about 3 feet tall and 6 feet long, covering about 60% of her grass. I made sure to leave a clear path to her front door and did not block her driveway. I was being malicious, sure, but I was not a monster. I was wheeling the scoop back to my house when I heard the scream. Karen's Lexus had just pulled into her driveway, and she was standing next to her car, staring at her lawn with her mouth open wide enough to catch flies. "What did you do?" she shrieked, her voice echoing through the quiet neighborhood. Lights started coming on in nearby houses. People were looking out their windows. I walked over slowly, keeping my expression neutral. "Hi, Karen. I complied with your ordinance. The snow is now more than 15 feet from the street, on private property. No violations. You dumped snow on my lawn. I utilized my right under the HOA easement clause to request temporary use of property for compliance purposes. Since the board did not follow proper procedure in approving an alternative location, all 3 of my requested locations remain under consideration. This was one of them." Her face was turning an impressive shade of red. "You cannot do this. This is vandalism. This is trespassing. It is neither. I have copies of all the relevant documents if you would like to review them." I held out the folder I had been carrying. She did not take it. Instead, she pulled out her phone and started jabbing at the screen. "I am calling the police. You are going to be arrested." "That is your right," I said calmly. "I will wait here." The next 40 minutes were entertaining. Karen spent the first 10 minutes on the phone, alternating between calling the police and calling other board members. Neighbors started coming outside, wanting to know what was happening. I explained the situation to each person who asked, showing them the ordinance and the easement clause. Most of them started laughing. Jeff Patterson, who was probably 75 and had lived in the subdivision since it was built, laughed so hard he had to lean against his mailbox. "Son, that is the best thing I have seen in 20 years. That woman has needed a reality check since the day she got elected." The police arrived at 6:15. 2 officers, an older guy named Officer Briggs and a younger woman named Officer Martinez. Karen rushed over to them immediately, talking so fast her words ran together. "He vandalized my property. He is harassing me. He dumped all this snow on my lawn without permission. I want him arrested right now." Officer Briggs held up his hand. "Madam, slow down. Let us take a look." He walked over to me, his partner following. "You want to tell me your side?" I handed him the folder. "The HOA president passed a new ordinance yesterday prohibiting snow piles within 15 feet of the street. I filed a proper easement request to use alternative property for compliance. The board improperly fast-tracked a response without following required procedures, so my original request is still under review. I used one of my 3 requested locations to store the snow in compliance with the new ordinance." Officer Briggs flipped through the documents, his flashlight illuminating the pages. He looked at his partner and I saw her suppress a smile. "This is an HOA dispute," he said finally. "This is not a criminal matter. You need to work this out through your board or hire lawyers." "But he is on my property," Karen insisted. "Is he on your property right now?" Officer Martinez asked. "No, but he was. Did he damage anything, break anything, steal anything?" Karen gestured wildly at the snow piles. "He dumped snow everywhere. Snow is not permanent damage, madam. And if he has documentation that he believes he has permission through HOA easement rules, this is a civil matter, not criminal." Officer Briggs handed me back the folder. "I would suggest you folks figure this out among yourselves, maybe at your next HOA meeting." The officers left and Karen stood in her driveway, shaking with rage. The gathered neighbors started heading back to their houses, several of them giving me thumbs up as they passed. "This is not over," Karen hissed at me. "I will make you regret this." "Looking forward to it," I said, and walked back to my house. The next morning, I woke up to 17 text messages and 9 missed calls. The neighborhood group chat was exploding. Apparently, Karen had spent the night sending out emails, trying to drum up support and calling for an emergency board meeting. She was demanding my immediate removal from the subdivision, which was not actually something the HOA had the power to do, but that had never stopped Karen from demanding impossible things before. Marcus texted me directly. "Meeting tonight at 7. Karen is out for blood. You need to be there." I spent the day working, though I will admit my concentration was not great. I kept looking out the window at Karen's house. The snow was still there, right where I left it. She had not tried to move it or remove it. I suspected she was leaving it as evidence, which was fine with me. At 6:30, I printed out more copies of all my documentation and headed to the community center where HOA meetings were held. The parking lot was packed, which was unusual. Normal meetings drew maybe 15 people. Tonight there had to be 50 cars. Inside, the meeting room was standing room only. Every chair was taken and people lined the walls. I recognized almost everyone as residents of Meadowbrook Heights. Word had clearly spread and people wanted to see what happened. Karen stood at the front of the room behind a folding table, flanked by Deborah Walsh and a guy named Timothy Hart, who was the treasurer. Marcus sat off to the side, looking uncomfortable. The other board members, there were supposed to be 7 total, were notably absent. Karen banged a gavel on the table, which was absurd because HOA meetings did not typically use gavels, but of course, Karen had one. "This emergency meeting of the Meadowbrook Heights HOA board is now in session. We are here to address the flagrant violations and harassment committed by Yates Richardson." A murmur went through the crowd. I raised my hand. "Point of order. Emergency meetings require notification to all homeowners at least 48 hours in advance per the bylaws. This meeting was called with less than 24 hours notice." Karen's eye twitched. "This is an emergency situation that requires immediate attention." "The bylaws do not have an exception for emergencies," I said. "Any decisions made at this meeting would be invalid." Marcus stood up. "He is right, Karen. I tried to tell you this on the phone. We cannot make binding decisions tonight." "Sit down, Marcus," Karen snapped. "You are not even supposed to be speaking. You did not attend the emergency meeting where we voted on the snow ordinance." "That meeting was also improperly called," Marcus said, not sitting down. "There was no quorum. You and Deborah do not constitute a majority of the 7-member board." The crowd was getting louder now, people talking to each other, some clearly enjoying the drama. Karen banged her gavel again. "Order. We will have order." Jeff Patterson stood up in the front row. "Karen, just admit you made up a stupid rule and now you are mad that someone called your bluff. Let people pile their snow where they have been piling it for 15 years and be done with it." "The ordinance was passed to maintain the aesthetic standards of our community," Karen said, her voice rising. "If we allow unsightly snow piles to accumulate near the streets, property values will decline." "Property values?" Someone shouted from the back. "Lady, we live in Colorado. Snow happens. Nobody is going to refuse to buy a house because they saw a snow pile in February." I decided it was time to take control. I walked to the front of the room and Karen actually stepped back like she thought I might attack her. "Can I address the group?" I asked. "No," Karen said at the same time Marcus said, "Yes." I turned to face the crowd. "I am sure most of you heard about what happened yesterday. Karen created a new rule that essentially makes it impossible to clear snow from our properties without enormous effort. When I filed a proper easement request to solve the problem, the board ignored procedure and tried to force me to haul snow half a mile away. So I used another option that was technically compliant with the new rule." People were nodding. Someone started clapping and others joined in. Karen's face was getting red again. "Here is my proposal," I continued. "Let us vote right now to rescind the snow ordinance. It was improperly passed anyway, and it serves no practical purpose. Everyone goes back to piling their snow where they have always piled it, and we all move on with our lives." "You cannot call for a vote," Karen sputtered. "You are not on the board." "Any homeowner in good standing can make a motion at an HOA meeting," Marcus said, pulling out his own copy of the bylaws. "And any motion can be put to a general vote if 10% of homeowners request it. I am pretty sure we have way more than 10% of homeowners in this room." A woman I recognized from 3 streets over stood up. "I second the motion. Let us vote." "All in favor of rescinding the snow pile ordinance?" Marcus asked. A forest of hands went up. I did a quick count. At least 60 people with their hands raised, all opposed. Karen, Deborah, and Timothy raised their hands. 3 people out of probably 80 in the room. "Motion passes," Marcus said. "The snow ordinance is rescinded." The room erupted in applause and cheers. Karen was shaking, her hands gripping the edge of the table. "This is not a valid vote. This meeting is not official. None of this counts." "Actually," said a voice from the doorway, "I think it does." Everyone turned. A man in a suit stood in the entrance, holding a briefcase. He was maybe 60 with gray hair and glasses. "My name is Robert Chen, and I am an attorney specializing in HOA law. I am also Marcus's father. He called me this afternoon and asked me to review the documents related to this dispute." He walked to the front of the room and set his briefcase on the table. "Miss Morrison, you have violated so many procedural requirements in the past 48 hours that I honestly do not know where to start. The snow ordinance was passed without proper notice or quorum. The easement response was fast-tracked without required review periods. And this meeting tonight was called without proper notice. However, the vote that just occurred actually is valid. Want to know why?" Karen stared at him, speechless for maybe the first time in her life. "Because while you failed to properly notice this as an emergency board meeting, you did send out an email to all homeowners saying there would be a gathering tonight to discuss community concerns. That qualifies as notice for a general membership meeting. And at a general membership meeting, the members have the authority to overturn board decisions with a simple majority vote, which is exactly what just happened." "Who are you to come in here and tell me what is valid?" Karen demanded. "I am an attorney who has handled HOA disputes for 30 years, and I am telling you that, if you continue down this path, you are going to expose this HOA to significant legal liability." He pulled papers from his briefcase. "I took the liberty of drafting a formal complaint on behalf of Mr. Richardson. If he chooses to file it, he can sue both you personally and the HOA for harassment, abuse of authority, and improper implementation of covenants. Given the clear evidence of procedural violations, he would almost certainly win. The HOA's insurance might cover the organization, but it would not cover you personally for willful misconduct." The room went dead silent. Karen's face had gone from red to white. "You are bluffing." "Try me," Robert Chen said calmly. "I work on contingency for cases like this. It would not cost Mr. Richardson a dime, and I would be happy to take it on just on principle." Karen looked around the room, maybe hoping for support, but everyone was either staring at her with hostility or very deliberately looking elsewhere. Finally, she grabbed her gavel and her papers and shoved them into her bag. "Fine. Do whatever you want. I do not care anymore. This community deserves what it gets." She stormed out, Deborah and Timothy scrambling to follow her. The room sat in stunned silence for a moment, then erupted in conversation. Marcus came over and shook my hand. "That was incredible. I cannot believe she actually left. Is she going to resign?" I asked. I doubt it, Robert Chen said, overhearing us. People like that do not resign. They double down. But her authority is pretty much shot now. The rest of the board can outvote her on anything, and the general membership can overturn her decisions like they did tonight. She is effectively neutered. People came up to thank me for standing up to Karen, which felt weird because I really just wanted to pile my snow in peace. But I shook hands and accepted pats on the back, and tried not to think about the fact that I still had a yard full of snow piles on Karen's lawn that I probably needed to deal with. Jeff Patterson solved that problem. "Leave it," he said with a grin. "Let it melt naturally. It will be gone in a week or two, and in the meantime, every time she looks out her window, she will remember what happens when you make stupid rules." I went home that night feeling like I had won something, but also waiting for the other shoe to drop. Karen was not the type to let things go, and I knew this was not really over. I was right. 3 days later, I got a certified letter from a law firm in Denver. Karen was suing me personally for property damage, emotional distress, and harassment. She was asking for $15,000 in damages. I called Robert Chen immediately. He laughed when I read him the letter. "She is suing you with the same attorney who handles her real estate closings. This guy does not know the first thing about HOA law or personal injury claims. Forward me the letter and I will handle it. Are you sure? I do not want to drag you into this if it is going to be a whole thing. Yates, I am semi-retired and bored. This is the most entertainment I have had in months. Forward me the letter." I did, and Robert sent back a response within 24 hours. His letter was a masterpiece. It methodically dismantled every claim in Karen's lawsuit, cited case law showing why each claim would fail, and ended with a thinly veiled threat to countersue for filing a frivolous lawsuit intended solely to harass. He sent copies to Karen, her attorney, and the HOA board. Karen's attorney withdrew from representing her 2 days later, but Karen was not done. If anything, she got worse. She started driving around the neighborhood with her phone, taking pictures of every possible violation she could find. A trash can left out past 7 a.m. Picture and citation. Christmas lights still up in late February. Picture and citation. Car parked on the street overnight. Picture and citation. She sent out 43 citations in 1 week. People were getting 2 and 3 violation notices at a time. The neighborhood group chat turned into a constant stream of complaints about Karen's newfound enforcement enthusiasm. The problem was that technically, most of the violations were real. The HOA covenants did have rules about trash cans and parking and seasonal decorations. They were rules that had never been strictly enforced because they were annoying and petty, but they existed. And as president, Karen had the authority to enforce them. Marcus called another board meeting, a properly noticed one this time, to address the issue. All 7 board members showed up, along with maybe 40 homeowners. Karen arrived with 3 ring binders full of photos and documentation, looking like a lawyer about to argue a case before the Supreme Court. "The covenants exist for a reason," she said when Marcus tried to suggest a more lenient approach to enforcement. "If we do not enforce them, they become meaningless. I am simply doing my job as president." "You are harassing the entire neighborhood," Marcus countered. "You have sent out more violations in 1 week than we typically send in a year. Because people have been violating the rules, and previous boards were too lazy to enforce them." One of the other board members, a woman named Sandra Phillips, spoke up. "Karen, we all know this is retaliation because of the snow pile incident. You are abusing your authority." "I am enforcing the rules equally across the entire community," Karen said, her voice like ice. If people do not want citations, they should follow the covenants they agreed to when they purchased their homes. The meeting went in circles for an hour. Karen would not back down, and the board did not have the authority to stop her from enforcing legitimate violations. Finally, Robert Chen, who had come as a guest at Marcus's invitation, offered a suggestion. The board has the authority to update the enforcement guidelines, he said. You could implement a warning system. First violation gets a friendly reminder. Second violation gets a warning. Third violation gets a fine. That way, legitimate enforcement continues, but people are not getting hit with surprise penalties for minor infractions. It was a reasonable compromise. The board voted 6-1 to implement the new guidelines, with Karen casting the only opposing vote. She left the meeting without speaking to anyone. I thought maybe that would be the end of it. The warning system meant that most people would fix minor violations before getting fined, and Karen would not be able to generate the same level of harassment. The snow on her lawn had melted. Spring was coming. Things should have gone back to normal, but I underestimated Karen's dedication to making my life difficult. In April, I got a notice that the HOA was filing a lien against my property for unpaid fines. According to the notice, I owed $3,200 for violations dating back to January. I had never received any of the citations that the fines were based on. I immediately called Marcus, who was as confused as I was. I will check the records. Hold on. He called me back 10 minutes later. Yates, Karen created a whole separate file of violations just for you. She never entered them into the main system, never sent copies to the other board members, just kept her own records and then filed the lien paperwork directly with the county. Can she do that? No, absolutely not. Liens require board approval. She forged the approval documents. That was when I knew Karen had crossed a line from annoying to criminal. I called Robert Chen, explained the situation, and asked what I should do. We need to document everything and then go to the police, he said. Filing false lien documents is fraud. Forging board approval signatures is forgery. These are actual crimes. Are you sure we need to involve the police? I do not want to ruin her life over HOA nonsense. Yates, she tried to put a lien on your house with fake documents. That could have destroyed your credit and cost you tens of thousands of dollars if you tried to sell or refinance. This is not HOA nonsense anymore. This is serious. We spent the next week gathering evidence. Marcus got copies of all the official HOA records, showing that no violations had been filed against me through proper channels. He also got copies of board meeting minutes, showing that no lien had been approved. Robert Chen contacted the county recorder's office and got copies of the lien documents, which included signatures from board members who swore they never signed anything. With all the evidence compiled, Robert Chen and I went to the Boulder Police Department. We met with a detective named Sarah Drummond who specialized in fraud cases. She listened to the whole story, reviewed the documents, and nodded slowly. This is definitely something we can pursue, she said. The forgery is clear, and the intent to defraud is obvious. Give me a few days to investigate and verify everything. Detective Drummond was thorough. She interviewed all the board members whose signatures had been forged. She reviewed HOA records. She even pulled Karen's previous lien filings to see if there was a pattern. What she found was disturbing. Karen had filed fraudulent liens against 3 other homeowners in the past year. All 3 were people who had opposed her on various issues. One person had paid the fraudulent fines just to make the problem go away, not realizing the lien was fake. The other 2 had moved out of the neighborhood rather than deal with the hassle. Detective Drummond brought Karen in for questioning. I was not there, but Marcus heard about it from Deborah, who apparently had a crisis of conscience once she realized how serious the situation was. Karen denied everything at first, then claimed she had made innocent mistakes, then finally refused to answer any more questions and demanded an attorney. The district attorney's office filed charges 2 weeks later. Karen Morrison was charged with 3 counts of forgery, 3 counts of filing false documents, and 1 count of criminal fraud. The charges were serious enough that she was looking at potential prison time if convicted. The neighborhood exploded with gossip. People who had lived in fear of Karen's citations suddenly felt emboldened to share their own stories of harassment and abuse. It turned out Karen had been systematically targeting anyone who disagreed with her, using her position as HOA president as a weapon. The HOA board held an emergency meeting, this one actually properly called, to discuss the situation. They voted unanimously to remove Karen as president and from the board entirely. They also voted to retain Robert Chen to represent the HOA in dealing with the legal fallout, and to review all of Karen's actions as president to identify any other potential problems. Robert Chen found plenty. Karen had been skimming money from the HOA accounts, taking reimbursements for expenses that were not legitimate. She had awarded contracts to her friends without proper bidding processes. She had approved landscaping work on her own property and charged it to the HOA. The total amount of financial irregularities was over $20,000. The board filed a civil lawsuit against Karen to recover the stolen funds. They also reported the financial crimes to the district attorney, who added embezzlement charges to the growing list of criminal charges Karen faced. Karen's real estate license was suspended pending the outcome of the criminal case. Her ex-husband, who had apparently been paying her alimony, filed to have those payments stopped based on her criminal conduct. Her house went up for sale, though I could not imagine anyone wanting to buy a house in a neighborhood where the seller was known as the criminal HOA president. The criminal trial was scheduled for September. In the meantime, the neighborhood started to heal. The new HOA president was a retired accountant named Dorothy Fletcher, who had zero interest in power trips and just wanted to make sure the common areas were maintained and people were not bothered unnecessarily. She implemented a complete overhaul of the enforcement system, focusing on education rather than punishment. The snow pile ordinance was formally stricken from the books. Dorothy even put out a newsletter joking about it, saying that snow was welcome to be piled anywhere reasonable and that common sense should prevail. I went to Karen's trial in September. I felt like I needed to see it through. Robert Chen was there too, sitting in the back of the courtroom. The trial lasted 3 days. The prosecution presented mountains of evidence: forged documents, fake signatures, fraudulent liens, embezzled funds. Karen's attorney tried to argue that she had been under stress and made mistakes, but the sheer volume of calculated criminal conduct made that defense laughable. The jury deliberated for 4 hours and came back with guilty verdicts on all counts. Karen sat stone-faced as the verdicts were read, not showing any emotion. Sentencing was scheduled for 6 weeks later. At the sentencing hearing, the judge was not sympathetic. "Miss Morrison, you abused a position of trust within your community to target people who disagreed with you and to enrich yourself. You filed false documents that could have caused significant financial harm to innocent people. You showed a pattern of calculated criminal behavior over an extended period. This was not a mistake or a moment of poor judgment. This was systematic fraud." The judge sentenced Karen to 3 years in prison, with eligibility for parole after 18 months. She also ordered Karen to pay restitution of $23,000 to the HOA and to cover the legal costs for the homeowners she had targeted with fraudulent liens. Karen was taken into custody immediately. As she was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, she looked at me. I expected anger or hatred, but her expression was just empty. She had destroyed her own life over HOA rules and personal grudges, and I think she finally understood that. I walked out of the courthouse with Robert Chen. The afternoon sun was bright, and the Colorado sky was that perfect deep blue that makes you remember why you live here. "You did the right thing," Robert said. "If you had not stood up to her, she would have kept targeting people indefinitely." "I just wanted to pile my snow in peace," I said, and he laughed. Life in Meadowbrook Heights went back to normal, or at least as normal as any HOA neighborhood can be. Dorothy Fletcher proved to be an excellent president, focused on actual community improvement rather than petty enforcement. The board started organizing neighborhood events again, things that had fallen by the wayside during Karen's reign. Block parties, holiday decorations contests, a community garden project. I got to know my neighbors better. People who had been afraid to speak up during Karen's time, as president, started participating in HOA meetings and volunteering for committees. The whole atmosphere of the subdivision changed from fearful to friendly. Jeff Patterson told me one evening, while we were both standing in our driveways enjoying the summer weather, that I had done more for the community than anyone in the past decade. I told him I just got lucky that Karen was so blatant about her crimes that she left a paper trail a mile long. "Luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity," he said with a grin. "You were prepared with all those documents and that easement request, and when the opportunity came to hold her accountable, you took it." Karen served 16 months before being granted parole. By the time she got out, her house had been sold to pay her debts and legal fees. She moved somewhere out of state. I heard maybe Texas or Arizona. I never saw her again. The following winter, when the first big snowstorm hit, I stood in my driveway with my shovel and looked at the strip of grass between the sidewalk and the street. I piled my snow right there, just like I always had, just like every other homeowner on the block was doing. Nobody complained. Nobody sent citations. Nobody called emergency meetings. It was just snow being piled in a reasonable place, and it would melt when the weather warmed up, and everything would be fine. That is how it should have been all along. Marcus stopped by while I was finishing up the shoveling. He had his own shovel over his shoulder and a thermos of coffee in his hand. "My dad told me to tell you he appreciated the entertainment. He said it was the most interesting case he has worked on since he retired. Tell him I appreciate everything he did." I could not have fought her without his help. "He said something else too," Marcus said, grinning. "He said HOA disputes are usually boring as hell, but every once in a while you get a case that is just completely insane, and those are the ones that remind him why he became a lawyer in the first place." We stood there in the cold, watching other neighbors clearing their driveways, kids building snowmen in yards, the whole subdivision looking like a postcard of perfect suburban winter life. It was hard to believe that less than a year ago, this same scene had triggered a chain of events that ended with someone going to prison. "You ever feel bad about it?" Marcus asked. "About Karen going to jail, I mean." I thought about it. I had asked myself the same question many times. "No," I said finally. "I feel bad that it happened, but I do not feel bad about my role in it. She made choices. She chose to abuse her power to target people, to commit crimes. All I did was refuse to be a victim and insist on accountability. If she had just let people pile their snow in peace, none of this would have happened." "That is a good way to look at it," Marcus said. He poured me a cup of coffee from his thermos. To reasonable snow piles and reasonable people. To reasonable snow piles and reasonable people, I repeated, and we clinked our coffee cups together. The story spread beyond our subdivision. A local news station did a piece about it, a kind of cautionary tale about HOA overreach. I declined to be interviewed on camera, but they talked to Robert Chen and Dorothy Fletcher, and some of my neighbors. The story went semi-viral online, shared in HOA horror story forums and legal discussion groups. I got emails from people all over the country dealing with their own Karen situations, asking for advice on how to fight back. I tried to respond helpfully, usually by telling them to document everything, know their rights, and find a good attorney. And I told them something else too, something Robert Chen had told me. The secret to dealing with bullies is refusing to be bullied. Stand your ground, follow proper procedures, and do not let them intimidate you into giving up. One email stuck with me. It was from a woman in Florida, whose HOA president was fining her for having the wrong shade of white paint on her house. She was terrified of fighting back because she could not afford legal fees and did not know what to do. I forwarded her email to Robert Chen, and he ended up connecting her with an attorney in Florida who handled her case pro bono. Last I heard, she won, and the HOA president was forced to rescind the ridiculous paint color rules. It made me realize that what happened with Karen was not just about me or my neighborhood. It was about a larger problem with HOA structures that give small-minded people outsized power over their neighbors' lives. When those structures lack proper accountability, abuse is inevitable. Dorothy Fletcher understood this. Under her leadership, the Meadowbrook Heights HOA implemented new checks and balances. Board decisions required majority votes with documented minutes. Financial transactions required dual approval and monthly audits. Enforcement actions required review by at least 2 board members before fines could be issued. Homeowners were given clear appeal processes with neutral arbitration options. Were these changes perfect? No, but they made it much harder for any future Karen to abuse the system the way she had. And that was the point. You could not prevent bad actors from seeking power, but you could structure systems to limit the damage they could do. 2 years after the snow pile incident, I was elected to the HOA board. I had not wanted to run, but several neighbors convinced me that my experience dealing with Karen made me exactly the kind of person they wanted in leadership. I accepted reluctantly, promising that my entire platform would be common sense and minimal interference in people's lives. My first act as a board member was to propose a comprehensive review of all HOA covenants, with the goal of eliminating outdated, petty, or unenforceable rules. We spent 6 months going through the entire rulebook, holding community forums to get input. In the end, we eliminated about 40% of the rules, including gems like the one prohibiting wind chimes, the one requiring all mailboxes to be exactly 42 inches tall, and the one banning any vehicle over 6 years old from being parked in driveways. We kept rules that made sense: maintenance standards to prevent properties from falling into disrepair, noise ordinances for community peace, safety requirements for pools and structures. But we eliminated the absurd stuff that existed only to give busybodies ammunition for harassment. The response from the community was overwhelmingly positive. People appreciated being treated like adults who could make reasonable decisions about their own properties. Violations decreased because people were happy to comply with reasonable rules. The HOA went from being seen as an antagonistic force to something closer to a helpful community organization. I served 2 terms on the board, before deciding I had done my part and stepping down. By then, Meadowbrook Heights had become known as one of the more desirable subdivisions in the Boulder area, specifically because of its reasonable HOA. Real estate agents mentioned it in listings. Property values increased. All because we got rid of one person who thought her job was to control everyone, and replace that mentality with respect for homeowners' autonomy within reasonable community standards. On the third anniversary of the snow pile incident, Jeff Patterson organized a neighborhood party. It was not officially about the anniversary, it was just a summer barbecue in the community park, but everyone knew what we were really celebrating. Someone made a cake decorated with little fondant snow piles. Someone else printed T-shirts that said Meadowbrook Heights, where snow piles free. I gave a short speech, mostly thanking everyone for supporting each other through what had been a genuinely crazy time. I talked about how communities work best when people assume good intentions, communicate directly, and hold their leaders accountable. Nothing revolutionary, just common sense that had gotten lost somewhere along the way. Dorothy Fletcher, who was stepping down as president after 3 successful years, gave a speech too. She talked about servant leadership, about how HOA boards exist to serve communities, not control them. She got a standing ovation. As the sun set and kids ran around playing tag and adults stood in clusters talking and laughing, I looked around at this neighborhood that had become a real community. It had taken a crisis to get here, and that crisis had come with real costs. Karen's life was ruined. Several homeowners had moved away before things got better. Time and money and energy had been wasted on conflict that never needed to happen, but we had come through it. We had learned something. And maybe, just maybe, our story would help other people stand up to their own Karens before things escalated to criminal charges and prison time. Marcus came over and handed me a beer. "You ever miss the drama?" he asked, joking. "Not even a little bit," I said. Though I do sometimes think about how insane it is that all of this happened because I wanted to shovel my driveway. "Not just because of that," Marcus said. "It happened because someone with power decided to abuse it, and you decided not to tolerate it. The snow pile was just the spark." He was right. The snow pile was symbolic of something larger. The idea that people in authority can make your life difficult just because they feel like it, and you are supposed to accept it. I had refused to accept it, and that refusal had exposed a pattern of abuse that needed to be stopped. Would I do it again? Yes, absolutely. Even knowing how it would escalate, even knowing the time and stress it would cost, I would make the same choice. Because the alternative was living in a community ruled by fear and arbitrary power, and that was no way to live. As the party wound down and people started heading home, Jeff Patterson pulled me aside. "You know what the best part of this whole thing is?" he asked. "What?" "Every winter when it snows and everyone piles their snow by the street like normal people, I think about Karen sitting in her prison cell and I smile." He paused. "Is that mean?" "Probably," I said, "but I get it." We both laughed. Sometimes justice feels good, even when it comes with complications. Maybe especially then. I walked home through the quiet subdivision, past houses where lights glowed warm in windows, where families were settling in for the evening, where people lived their lives without fear of arbitrary fines or harassment. It was not perfect. No community is. But it was better than it had been, and that counted for something. My house was dark when I got there. I had forgotten to leave a light on. I stood in the driveway for a moment, looking up at the stars that were just becoming visible in the darkening sky. Somewhere out there, Karen Morrison was living whatever life she had managed to rebuild after prison. I hoped she had learned something. I hoped she found peace, even though she had never given any to the people around her. But mostly, I hoped she never got the chance to be an HOA president again. I went inside, flipped on the lights, and started thinking about what to make for dinner. Life went on. The snow would come again in a few months, and I would shovel it, and I would pile it by the street, and nobody would care. That was how it should be. That was finally how it was. And if anyone ever tried to tell me I could not pile my snow in a reasonable location again, well, I had a folder full of documents and the phone number of a very good attorney who specialized in HOA law. But I did not think I would need them. Lightning does not strike twice, right? And surely no other HOA president would be foolish enough to make the same mistakes Karen had made. Not after her story had become a cautionary tale shared in forums and news articles and neighborhood warnings across the country. Then again, I had thought Karen was being unreasonable when she first told me I could not pile snow by the street. I had thought surely she would back down when confronted with logic and rules. I had underestimated how far someone would go when they felt their authority was being challenged. So maybe I would keep that folder and that phone number handy, just in case. Not because I expected trouble, but because I had learned that being prepared was the best defense against people who mistook positions of minor authority for absolute power. The microwave beeped, pulling me out of my thoughts. I ate dinner alone, watched some television, and went to bed at a reasonable hour. Just another normal evening in just another normal subdivision in Colorado. Except it was not quite normal, not really. Normal subdivisions do not have stories about HOA presidents going to prison. Normal neighborhoods do not have T-shirts commemorating snow pile disputes. Normal communities do not bond over shared trauma caused by one person's abuse of power. But maybe that was okay. Maybe what we had now was better than normal. Maybe we had earned something that other subdivisions take for granted. The knowledge that we could stand up to bullies, that we could hold leaders accountable, that we could change systems that were not working. That knowledge had come at a cost, but it was worth it. I fell asleep that night thinking about snow, about piles of white powder that had become symbols of resistance, about how the smallest things can become battlegrounds when people decide that control matters more than community. And I thought about how satisfying it had been to watch those snow piles sit on Karen's front lawn, how each wheelbarrow load had felt like a small victory for common sense and reasonable behavior. Would I recommend that other people dump snow on their HOA president's lawn? No, probably not. It had worked out for me because Karen's crimes went far beyond being annoying about snow piles, and the investigation had revealed systematic abuse. But in a different situation, it could have just made things worse. The real lesson was not about the specific tactic. It was about refusing to be intimidated, about knowing your rights, about demanding accountability from people in power. The snow piles were just theater, a dramatic way of making a point. The actual victory came from documenting violations, following proper procedures, and exposing criminal behavior through appropriate legal channels. But damn, those snow piles had been satisfying. Years from now, when I eventually sell this house and move on to whatever comes next, I know what story I will tell about my time in Meadowbrook Heights. Not about the neighbors I met, or the HOA meetings I attended, or the community events we organized. Those things matter, but they are not what made this place memorable. I will tell people about the winter a woman named Karen Morrison tried to ban snow piles near the street, and how that one decision cascaded into a series of events that changed everything. I will tell them about moving snow onto someone's front lawn in an act of malicious compliance that felt both petty and profound. I will tell them about standing up to a bully and discovering that sometimes, just sometimes, standing up works. And I will tell them about what came after. The healing, the reforms, the transformation of a fearful community into one built on mutual respect and reasonable rules. That is the story of Meadowbrook Heights, Colorado, and how a dispute about snow piles exposed corruption, sent someone to prison, and ultimately made a neighborhood better. It is not the story I expected to be part of when I moved here 5 years ago. But it is the story I got, and I would not change it. Well, maybe I would change the part where I had to spend hours wheelbarrowing snow across the neighborhood. That part was exhausting. But the rest of it, the standing up and fighting back and refusing to accept unreasonable authority, that part I would keep exactly as it happened. Because some things are worth fighting for, even if those things are as simple and mundane as the right to pile snow in a sensible location without harassment. Sometimes the smallest freedoms are the ones most worth defending. And sometimes the people who try to take those freedoms away end up learning that lesson the hard way, through criminal charges and prison sentences, and the complete destruction of their credibility and authority. I do not take pleasure in Karen's downfall, not really. But I do not regret my role in exposing her crimes either. She made her choices. I just refuse to be victimized by them. Everything that happened after that was a consequence of her own actions, not mine. That is what I remind myself on the occasional nights when I wonder if I should have just hauled my snow to the vacant lot and avoided the whole mess. Could I have prevented Karen's crimes from being exposed? Would she have stopped eventually on her own? Would someone else have stood up to her if I had not? Maybe. But probably not. Bullies do not stop until someone makes them stop. Systems do not reform themselves until someone demands reform. And crimes do not get prosecuted unless someone reports them. I was just the person who happened to be in the right place at the right time with the right combination of stubbornness and documentation skills to make a difference. Or maybe I was just a guy who wanted to shovel his driveway in peace and refused to let one unreasonable person make that impossible. Either way, the outcome was the same. Karen Morrison went to prison. Meadowbrook Heights got better. And I never had to worry about where to pile my snow ever again. That seems like a win to me. Not a perfect win, not a clean win, but a win nonetheless. And in a world where HOA disputes usually end with someone giving up or moving away, I will take that victory and feel good about it. The snow will fall again. It always does in Colorado. And when it does, I will be ready with my shovel and my snow scoop and the absolute confidence that I can pile that snow wherever is reasonable and convenient, just like every other homeowner in America should be able to do. And if anyone ever tries to tell me otherwise, well, I have got a story to tell them about what happened the last time someone made that mistake. It is a hell of a story.